Hey class, so in this video we're going to continue on working through these examples. So in this next one, 4 cosine squared of x minus 1 equals 0, you kind of want to think about how you solved it algebraically before. If there wasn't a trig function here, we're going to try to solve by taking the square root. So what we want to do here is we want to add 1 to both sides. So I have 4 cosine squared of x equals 1. I want to get my cosine by itself, so I'm going to divide by 4. So cosine squared of x equals 1/4. And then I'm going to take the square root of both sides, so I'm left with my cosine value. Well, remember, when you're solving by taking the square root, you are going to have a positive and negative version of it. And then when I take the square root of 1/4, I get 1/2. So what I'm looking for is everywhere that cosine is 1/2, either positive or negative. When I go back to my unit circle, I'm going to just find out everywhere that happens. So I know it happens here at pi over 3 or 60 degrees. I keep going around. I know it happens at 2 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3, and 5 pi over 3. So it happens at 4 different locations. This is where cosine my x value is positive or negative. So depending on what the question asks, if it told us from 0 to 360, I know I would put down my degrees, which were 60, 120, 240, and 300. But if they asked for my radians from 0 to 2 pi, we obviously just want to write down our radian values, which would have been pi over 3, 2 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3, and 5 pi over 3. Now, I do want to remind you that we've done some of these on the calculator. You can still use your calculator to help you find these values, so let's practice that with this one. So if I go to my calculator and I go to my y equals value, I get this thing to turn on. So go to my y equals, and what we're going to do is type in the exact value like we did last time. So I know I have 4 cosine. It may seem weird when you type this in because you can't put this square exactly where it's at. So we're going to put our x value in there and then squared. And we know this is minus 1. And then remember down here for y squared, we're still going to keep that as 0. So I'm going to go to zoom trig, which is number 7. We'll be able to look at our graph here. And all we're doing is finding out where this actually crosses the x-axis at. So I'm going to first look here. So second trace, intersect. And I'm going to scroll to here. I'm going to hit enter 3 times. And I automatically get 60. We'll do it again, second trace, intersect. We see our next positive value is right here. I'm going to enter that again. Gives me my 120. And then we see we have these other two values. If y'all would continue to do this, you would then get your 240 and your 300. So you're more than welcome to try these on the calculator. Usually the calculator is going to take you a lot longer than it would to just actually simplify these values. But definitely show work when you do this, but you can always use the calculator to help you check those solutions. So let's try a couple more of these examples. So this next one, I have 2 cosine squared of x plus 3 cosine x. I'm sorry, this was supposed to be, this value right here, supposed to be minus 1. Okay, I'm definitely going to change that for us to make sure we don't forget that. So this should have been minus 1 here. Let me fix it for you real quick. So I'm going to make this a negative 1, and it's going to make it something that I really want us to focus on. So we want to set this equal to 0 because we're seeing cosine squared of x and cosine of x. I kind of want y'all to think about it like this. If I had 2x squared plus 3x equals negative 1, how would you have solved this in a different course? Well, I'm thinking I have quadratics, so I could possibly factor. So if I'm trying to factor something, I need it to be equal to 0. So 2 cosine squared of x plus 3 cosine of x equals positive 1. And if you had forgotten how to factor, I'm sorry, this was supposed to be plus 1. Plus 1 equals 0. And if you have forgotten how to factor, definitely go back and look at that. Practice some problems or stuff on Khan Academy. Any of those values, I'm going to walk you through this one. Factoring is still values that we use in this course. So if I wanted to be able to factor this, one way to do that is the AC method, or I do my A times my C, so 2 times 1 is 2. So I get 2 here. And then I want to factor. What multiplies to give me 2 that will add to give me 3? Well, I know that is 1 times 2. So cosine plus 1, cosine plus 2. And then the last thing we have to do is remember I multiplied 2 in the very beginning, so I need to cancel that off by dividing by 2. So cosine of x plus 1/2, because that does not simplify, and cosine of x plus 1. So what you now have to do is set each of those equal to 0. So cosine of x plus 1/2 equals 0, and cosine of x plus 1 equals 0. And let's solve them. So I'm going to subtract 1/2. So when is cosine equal to negative 1/2? And then subtract 1. And when is cosine of x equal to negative 1? So we're just going to have to go to our unit circle to check those. So let's check the 1/2 first. So when is cosine negative 1/2? All right, so when is cosine negative 1/2? And we kind of did this a second ago. I know everything's positive in quadrant 1, but if I look here, it is negative 1/2 here. And it would also be negative 1/2 here. So I have 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3. 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3. And those will be the only two solutions for those because it's only a negative 1/2. Now let's look, where's cosine of x equal to negative 1? Remember, cosine is your x value, and it only gets a negative 1 here at my pi. So that will be my third solution. So I'd get a solution of pi. So all three of those are solutions for this problem. You would tell me 2 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3, and actual pi. Okay, so let's try this next example at the bottom. So in this example, we see we have some values that are squared again. We don't have anything else though, so it's not something we're going to try to necessarily factor right away. What I want you to kind of think about is GCF. Do they have anything in common? And they do. They both have sine x values. So I'm going to take that out. So if I take out a sine x, I get 2 sine x minus the square root of 2. And that's still all equal to 0. And so since you have already broken down that square value, all you have to do is set each one of them equal to 0 and solve. So I have 2 sine x minus square root of 2 equals 0. So this value right here is done for us. There's no other solving to do. But this value over here, we can continue. We can add square root of 2. And then divide by 2. So I'm looking for sine of x equals square root of 2 over 2. So I want to find when sine of x is 0 and when sine of x is square root of 2 over 2. So once again, you're just always going to look back at your unit circle for these values, y'all. And what's going to happen is we're going to see sine is 0 at 0 and pi, so 0 and 180. And square root of 2 over 2, the positive version, will happen at pi over 4 and 3 pi over 4. Okay, so if you're having any trouble with those, definitely make sure we look back and we can double check real quick. All right, so we were looking to see when sine is 0. Okay, so my y value is 0. We know what happens here and here, so that's where I got my 0 and my pi. And then we wanted to find when sine was positive square root of 2 over 2, so my y value is positive square root of 2 over 2, which happened here for my positive value. And then it also would happen here at 3 pi over 4. Okay? And this is where y'all can kind of remember what we talked about with our quadrants. Remember, all students take calculus. So if I'm looking for a positive version of sine, we know that only happens in the first quadrant and the second quadrant. So that's where your solutions should be at.